Welcome to the Pipeline and People podcast, the show for founders who want cleaner decisions and better weeks. Managing adults shouldn't be a full-time job. We're talking about how to hire people who manage themselves before the interview even starts. Our guest today is Jane Allen, a 30-year founder who built and sold SmartWork Networks, then spun off her most powerful asset, a predictive hiring system used by 3,500 companies worldwide. She now leads SmartWork Assessments. Jane, welcome. Could you kick us off with a quick look at your background and what you're building?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jaden. Thanks for having me. For 25 years, I had SmartWork Network, which was an executive search and sales consultancy. That was mostly for small and medium-sized businesses, a few large clients, but primarily small and medium-sized clients who were growing and scaling. In that business, I used a very predictive assessment suite. And so when I sold my business, I carved that out to keep because during the time that I was recruiting, I also had this assessment sales. So we'd recruit for them, but then they would want to continue using our assessments. And then I had resellers, consultants, and people that I knew that wanted to use them. So I started another business called SmartWork Assessments. I didn't fully push it because I was too busy in my recruiting, but when I did sell the business, I decided to keep that business and make it my primary work. So that's what I am all about today.
Amazing. I'm sure a lot of people that may be watching this have heard of predictive assessments, maybe predictive index or something like that, but I want to start simple. Explain to me what SmartWork Assessments is as if I was a friend or someone that isn't in the industry at all.
Okay, I'll do my best, Jaden. I'm trying to write a book because sometimes the science is complex. We speak about things that don't matter. So I'll try to put it in common terms that make sense. There are thousands of assessments and most of them are validated, not all of them. Some are more like fun and interesting, but have little data. When I started my recruiting business, I went for something that had more data and more science rather than less, because I was a bit of an assessment junkie and had taken most of the assessments out there. I was in the executive development business before I got into recruiting. And so we're into leadership behavioral assessments. Those don't do so well for selection in terms of pre-hire because they're focused more on what people are doing today and not so much on who people are. The science of SmartWork assessments really looks at this concept of what we call self-management. It looks at what level of responsibility does somebody naturally take on. There's no good or bad, right or wrong. We're not pigeonholing people and saying you're good for this and not good for this. Our data shows over 45 years that we can measure someone's potential to succeed in certain types of job roles. And that measurement has to do, and this is kind of where I've tried to translate the science into how much or how little kind of responsibility people want to take on. As you know, some people like yourself are hardwired to be entrepreneurs. You like the challenge of starting something new, creating your own way. Other people are much more focused on security and stability, and that's all good. We call it normative science, which means we have these norms, certain levels of enterprising, let's say. Other people like more stability. Where you are on this continuum aligns you to certain types of job roles. Our science has put that into a very predictive model so that we can build predictive models for any role. We have lots of data in financial services and technology and in any number of roles, depending on whether it's sales, service, operations. That's what SmartWork Assessments is about. It's helping clients look at their models and benchmark their models to see who they have against our data, against their performance goals. And then we're able to give them a hiring model to use to get more high performers like the ones they have.
Yeah, it's very, very fascinating. Do you see anyone that's they end up on the very entrepreneurial side of the assessment or the results, and what sort of position would be best for them?
That's a great question. Yes, we see extremes, Jaden. An extreme would be that somebody becomes very much, so they're on one end of the continuum. So people who are focused on either sales roles or entrepreneurial roles. To be an entrepreneur, you have to be comfortable going after the unknown. You have to have a vision and see that, okay? So in one of the scales, we're looking at that enterprising potential. That's your initiative. What does it take to be, every day you got to go out there and start all over again and find it. Nobody's giving you the answer. You got to find that. The second piece we look at in that, Jaden, is really what is one's achievement potential? Do they like the challenge, or are they looking for money? Are they looking for recognition? What matters to somebody? So that very far end has to do with people who really like challenge or money. And then the third one is about structure. People who are entrepreneurs are often very independent. They think outside the box. Sometimes they become entrepreneurs because they've been in a box and they want to get out of it. And that's really what happened to me. I'm a very independent person, didn't realize that was who I was, but I kept working for companies and they would put me in a box and I just would want to get out. So we see that extreme on the left end of that continuum tends to be entrepreneurial or what I would call competitive sales. If you look at the other extreme, you're looking at people like my husband who are very steady as you go. People say, you seem to tell him what to do. And I said, well, if you ask him, he likes for me to tell him what to do because that's who he is. He likes to get it right. He likes to please me. We have roles all along that. He stayed in a corporate job most of his life. It was very comfortable for that stability and structure. There's no right or wrong, good or bad. When we're mismatched, he got an offer from a very large, if I told you, one of the best insurance companies, competitive sales and insurance, because he was articulate, he had a college degree, he looked good, he knew how to talk to people, but he couldn't pick up that 100-pound telephone to call people. We sometimes get lost in the biases of what we think versus really testing it out to see if someone is hardwired for a particular role. We're looking at that hardwiring, which by the time we're 16 years old. So even before we enter the workforce, we kind of have this hardwiring and it doesn't change.
That's very interesting. I was actually going to ask you about that because I'm fresh out of university. I'm applying for my very first job.
Right.
And they give me a predictive index. Subconsciously, I'm like, what do they want to hear? When I'm answering the questions and doing the assessments, what do they want to know? I got my results back and I'm not 100% sure this is accurate, but you're saying that's who you are since you were 16 or whatever. Well, how does that work?
Predictive index is actually a behavioral assessment. So that's an interesting concept. It's good assessment, but it tends to be more behavioral and more about who you are today. Our assessment is based on hardwired personality traits. Okay. It's one of the few that looks at what we call personality as in hardwired. There's personality as in, kind of your outward, which we sometimes call behaviors. But we're looking at those things I mentioned, which is really how do you, when you wake up in the morning, okay, and that stuff, Jaden, really has to do with our nurturing, our upbringing, how we carried things out. In today's world, you're young and I'm old, but I came from the baby boomer generation and had to work on a farm. I grew up having to take responsibility. I had an egg route selling eggs door to door when I was 8 years old. I had to build that responsibility. That changes over the decades. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means some of us are hardwired that way. Other people are not hardwired that way. It doesn't say we can or can't do anything. It does set us, however, to be naturally hardwired. I use that word natural because when we try to do something outside of our natural talent, we can stand on our heads for a short time, but generally not for a longer time. So again, to your point about answering right out of college, we have a piece in our assessment that shows if you tried to answer it the way somebody wanted you to. There's a component of it. On ours, though, we're asking, and this is how it's different from Predictive Index, 21 times the same items. So every time you're asked that, you're putting it one place or another, and it never pigeonholes you. It's just putting you on that continuum. So the reason ours is reliable is because you have to spend more time doing it, and we're asking those items so many times that we're never pigeonholing you. We're not saying to you, are you more creative or are you more collaborative? Those two things aren't even in the same world, but that's what a lot of assessments do is they ask you, then it pigeonholes you. Well, if you're creative, then you're not collaborative. Ours simply ask you the same items. You're sometimes saying, well, you're less like that, more like that. You can't really game it because you don't know what you're addressing. That's an issue with assessments, Jaden, is people try to answer them when there are only 24 items pretty easy to answer. I can do a predictive index and answer almost any way because I've taken it enough times. It's part of a model. Doesn't mean it's bad or good. It just means mine might show different things because I'm going to answer it different ways. That's the way you have to look at the reliability and accuracy of an assessment. How many items are you using to get to that? In our world, we have to be very careful about what we call EEOC requirements for big companies. We can't have biases against people. So you have to be sure that it's not going to bias anybody. It's not going to say something about you.
It sounds like the back end and the way that the insights are derived is pretty complicated with your assessments.
It is.
So I'm wondering, do you currently use AI for that, or how do you see AI fitting into that space?
That is a very interesting question. A year or so ago, I may have not been able to answer, but today I can give you a little bit about how we see AI because it has an important place in the whole recruiting process. And I'll talk a little bit about how we use it for assessments. I read a study. It was a study of AI-related assessment tools compared to what we call traditional assessment tools that have a lot of longevity to them. Today, AI tools are not the best to use for assessing people for performance. We have 45 years. By the time I'm dead and gone, there probably will be AI tools. But today, these traditional psychometric tools have a lot of complexity to them, are better for that, what I would call the selection based on that performance. However, I heard about this the other day from one of my colleagues. He has an IT company. And he was recruiting for one of my resellers in one of my companies, which I'll tell you about, who uses AI. He got 250 resumes for a position. And I've been recruiting for 25 years. I can tell you going through 250 resumes, especially of a technical kind of role, as you probably know, is very difficult. How do you really compare and contrast? He had built a very defined job description with the key criteria. He was looking at, do these people have the technical skills? That, along with the resumes, and he was able to take that pipeline and get it down to 20 people that they looked at, which I thought was genius. He was only looking at one thing, technical acumen, but it gave him a good place to start because the technical was where we had to start. So I think AI in that selection process used in that way is great. What we have to be careful about is not mixing that kind of AI that helps you with the process, helps you get it down to something smaller, with really trying to predict performance. Predicting performance is more complex. In that regard, I think that's where the differences are. A little example of that, Jaden, and where we're seeing the use of it to help us with the assessments, we often do benchmarking. We would recently we had a client who had 10 salespeople. This was back when I was recruiting. We kept recruiting for the same job role. They wanted experience in the Rolodex. Those people were hard to find. When we did, they were more relationship salespeople. So they were very much about going back in over and over, that kind of industrial. They might be selling industrial paint, oils, or chemicals. So they were going back in. But what this client wanted was somebody who was prospecting all the time. We would bring them those people, but they would like the other people because they had a Rolodex. Unfortunately, over the couple of years, those people did okay, but they were not as good as their incumbents who were high performers, who were more competitive. So long story short, we were able to do a little validation study. So that validation study then showed us very clearly, you really need to hire this. So today, using AI, I have another client, a reseller, who is building a platform, a technology platform, where they are measuring effort and output using AI recording telephone calls. In recording those calls, they use our assessment, they compare those two, and they're measuring, does the assessment match the output, which is they happen to be in the automotive service industry. Are they getting an appointment? Their goal is to get an appointment with customers. So we're using AI to gather that data, okay, that we then compare to the assessment data. So in that regard, we're using AI. We're also using AI, and this is a great way to help us in taking some of this content that we've been talking about, this little bit scientific, and put it into plain English.
Yeah.
because reading it is sometimes complex. Our company that developed this, they're statisticians, and often that data is complex to people. So we reword it using the same content, but so people can understand it. I think there are going to be a lot of uses of AI, and I'm learning more about it every day. I think it's going to help us with benchmarking, with content, which are just going to make the assessment data more usable and user-friendly for people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And it's very interesting to see all of the specific use cases within different industries. Back to something you said earlier, when you were talking about the 250 resumes, I thought that was going to go a very different route.
Okay.
I was about to ask you, what percent of them were written with AI? And do you use software to detect that? Is it encouraged,
No.
discouraged?
So this is a Jainism. This is not an industry thing. This is me. First of all, I learned a really good, well-written resume is not in any way a predictor of performance. So my belief is, and I basically said this to these guys that I was working with, I think your approach makes good sense because you might as well use something to get, you got 250, you got to get it down to something. Nobody has time to go through and say, well, this one had this certification or that certification. However, I think most bias happens at the resume level, whether it's written by AI or not, which is why I don't put much faith in it. The resume, in my opinion, is only something to give us the name of the person, some idea of have they worked in the industry. I don't really try to go through. HR people tend to go, oh, they only have 2 years of college, or, oh, look at them. They've only got 2 years here and 2 years there. I do not do that. My belief is, unless I'm hiring a resume writer, I'm not looking for that. If somebody's changed jobs every 6 months, I'm going to throw it out. But sometimes in the world we live in today, your generation may have 20 or 30 jobs by the time you're 50.
Wow.
Literally. A lot of that is today's generation does not know what they want to do. Younger than you, they just don't know. They don't have any idea. And that's one of the issues that we have. This is getting worse and worse. They're struggling. They don't even know whether to go to college or not. So I'm much more about if somebody looks like they have some affinity to my industry, some experience, I'm clearly going to throw out a resume that doesn't have any of that. But I am going to give the benefit of the doubt to somebody who might have had one big company. Some of the best salespeople I've ever hired have had more than 3 jobs in 10 years. So what you have to look at, though, is why have they had 3 jobs in 10 years? Have they been in the wrong role? Were they wrong to begin with and they've struggled? This is particularly since COVID. During COVID, 80% of the salespeople lost their jobs. My son lost his job. He'd been in the hospitality business. He was at the top of his game, supposed to go to corporate, lost his job in that industry, had to start all over. So I know for a fact a lot of people had to start all over. They needed a job. So they took on jobs which were not great companies. So to your point, people put way too much emphasis on the resume itself. Where I'm looking at it, I use an applicant tracking system. I ask questions that I want to find out. So I'm going to do some knockout questions about, if I have to have experience in certain field, I'm going to say, do you have it or do you don't have it? If it's a no, then I'm going to knock them out. Then I'm going to say, now tell me what your experience is. I leave a lot of open-ended questions. So they're going to answer enough in those demographic questions for me to figure out, and then I'm going to use an assessment. So that's how I figure out. Then I'm going to have a lengthy behavioral-based interview. I'm going to get to know them. One of the things you sent me ahead of time, and I thought I would mention this relative to that, what is the biggest mistake that small business owners or small, medium-sized business owners make? There are 2. First and foremost, they think recruiting is selection. Attraction and recruiting is only that. You're getting candidates into your pipeline, period. When people are paying recruiters a lot of money just to find the perfect 3 people, I wouldn't pay a recruiter to do that at all. I'm looking for somebody to go through enough candidates that they've compared and contrasted those candidates to a well-defined criteria that I'm looking for. Most people put more emphasis on recruiting and less on selection. When they do that selection, it's not consistent. They take one person to lunch, invite somebody else in to meet the team, somebody else interviews somebody else. In selection, you have to follow the same process over and over again. They fall in love and might use an assessment. Before you fall in love, you have to get that assessment data to see who you've got. And then you use that as part of your selection process. Then you know a little bit more about them. I can ask more questions. I understand who you are now. Then I can dive a little deeper into those things. Those are some of the things I see that mistakes are made just because everybody's trying to get it right and nobody has the perfect process. But those are some of the things I see that business owners tend to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the values and approach that you take to this. It's very structured and based on
Right.
data, but you're also not ruling people out just because they moved a couple jobs or don't have a ton of experience. I really like that because you never know
no.
who you're saying no to.
That's right. I have found some of the greatest candidates whose resumes were terrible. Sometimes I say, you're going to have to rewrite this. You don't need it to be perfect. You just need it to be clear. Clients want to know what you've done, but you got to put it in a way. Sometimes I have to coach candidates because they need a good resume. Some of the best salespeople have the worst resumes. They've been so focused on being out there making money, but I say, you got to have one. Just put it in order for me. I tend to be sort of the odd duck on that. I don't really worry about whether somebody wrote AI. I'm going to check in to see if I'm going to do reference checks. Rarely in my experience, maybe with the people I've recruited, do people just out and out lie and say they've done things that they haven't. A few do, but that's not the norm in terms of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I saw somewhere on your website or LinkedIn a pretty vivid metaphor of not unicorns, but golden eagles.
That's right.
What makes a golden eagle in your data?
A golden eagle is somebody who has talent. They know who they are. They're very aware of who they are. They know what their strengths are. They know their level of self-management. They know, Dr. Marshall started with hockey players. And he said, there were hockey players who were fantastic. They knew themselves well. And then there were others who didn't really know themselves that well. So a golden eagle knows what they're good at and what they're not. And they build up the strengths to mitigate their weaknesses. And they work hard. They put out effort. You can't just have a strong responsibility and self-management naturally and still not put out effort. You have to have both. We call a golden eagle somebody who knows who they are, they're in the right role, and they consistently put out effort. They do what they say they're going to do. They make commitments. It's that person you want to have on your team. They don't have to be perfect, but they're going to work every day consistently. You're not going to have to push them because it's an internal drive they bring to the table.
Okay, that's great. I like that term, golden eagle. It's
Yeah.
good. Something that's come up a lot in my conversations, and it's a very kind of popular topic right now, is culture.
Yeah.
Right? So how does your assessments kind of fit with, culture? Founders worry about hiring clones, but also fear being misaligned. How does your assessment help clients move that needle, build a culture they're proud of?
That is a great question. Because to your point, in a smaller company, culture is the owners. It is whoever they've got managing. So we do something that I don't know that any other recruiter does in our assessment process. I never did a recruiting project without using my assessments. I did not charge clients because I didn't want anybody to say, oh no, I used another assessment. I'm not going to use yours. I said, you use whatever you want to, but for me presenting candidates, I'm using mine. So if you said, Jaden, we wanted to recruit for you, let's say, and you told me what your culture was, first I'm going to be aware of that in my interviewing process, but I'm also going to assess you as the hiring manager, as the business owner. Small companies, that is the culture. And so we assess the hiring manager, we assess the management team. We don't always match it exactly, as we don't need clones in every way, but we need clones in some ways. If your culture is fast-paced, if you are scaling, if you are growing, then you need people who can keep up. That is your culture. Your culture is, we're on the move. I've got a client that is absolutely sold. Matter of fact, most of my clients were scaling and growing. So we had to understand, first of all, who were the people they had in the job roles. So that's where we get into the benchmarking. We're assessing the management team to see who they are. Okay, so if we were hiring service people, those service people are not always going to look like the ownership. But the service people who are successful are the ones we want to clone. So in this auto service group that we're working with, we know what an auto service performer is. We know what somebody is in the green if they're in the auto service. It doesn't mean we might not hire somebody out of it, but we know what a high performing person is. So when we hire outside of that, we're hiring against the culture. The second piece is then we're looking at, do they have the values? Do they have those other sort of things? I have one client that is a very religious organization. They don't have to have people who follow their particular religion, but they don't want people to go against it either. So in recruiting, you've got to ask those questions. Those are underlying things. You have to make sure that people are going to be aligned and not be against whatever those things are. But generally, when they mean culture, they really mean how the people work, how they come to work, and how they show up. If you have, I guess, growing up, I told you how I was raised, and I went to my friends' houses, and they didn't have to work, and we went to the beach, and we went out. It was a different culture. Those people had to come and live in my world where I had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go out and gather eggs. They would not have fit. Part of it is, how do we work? What are we trying to do? It's a combination of what are those kind of soft things we're looking at, but really we're almost always focusing on what kind of performance are we looking at. And if we allow people to get away without performing, that's the culture. So anybody will do. If we're looking for people to take ownership, that's the culture. So that's the way we look at it, and our assessment's going to tell us that.
Got it. Trying to be conscious of time here, but I do have one more quick question. You mentioned something about a green. I want to know, is there ever any instances where a red is ignored or bypassed? Like,
oh, yeah.
This guy's red, but
It's
we're going to hire
not
him anyway.
for me, but for clients. The old concept of you can lead a horse to water, but doesn't mean they're going to drink.
Yeah.
Sometimes, no matter how much data we show people, until they've had a few mistakes and done what they've done, they may keep doing it. So I can bring candidates now, and this is what I would try to explain. In my recruiting process, I'm going to make sure I only bring candidates who are a green and slightly in the yellow. Okay, I'm never going to bring them a red. But when they're using assessments on their own and they see somebody in the red and they want to hire, they go, that's why I say don't fall in love with them. What we do sometimes is we fall in love with a candidate, spend the rest of the interview trying to justify why we made that decision. I have had an opportunity, and do this quite regularly, to simply interview candidates for clients. Okay, I don't recruit at all. Sometimes clients say, would you interview them and do your assessment? They show me the candidates, I interview them, and I give them the truth. This is what they tell me the job is, and I do the interview. I say, don't tell me what you're interested in. Let me tell you what I think based on what you told me the job is. I go back and tell them the truth, and they go, well, we really like this candidate. I go, I understand. It's your choice to hire them. Often they come back and say, boy, did we make a mistake. And I go, you know, we all did. I did it when I first started too. Not everybody's going to get it right every time. What I encourage is data, and you know this in your business, data helps make informed decisions. So if you have the data and you make an informed decision and you get it wrong, we say hire slowly and get rid of quickly. If you've made a mistake, change, but do something different the next time. Getting good data on the front end gives you the opportunity to make informed decisions. Some people hire in the red, and sometimes they're lucky, but not often.
I think you mentioned that you're writing a book.
I am writing a book, and it's taking, I'm not a writer. I mean, I'm a pretty good writer, but I'm not a book writer. This has been a tedious but very interesting process. I'm writing it with my collaborator, Dr. John Marshall, who was the developer of this assessment. He being the scientist and me being the practitioner. I've changed the title a number of times, but I think we finally settled on Predicting Potential, the science of matching people to job responsibility. That literally is what we do. It will hopefully be out before the end of the year, and we're steadily moving towards that goal, and hopefully that will help people. It's really designed primarily for small and medium-sized business owners to understand the science, educating people on this science. The book is about giving somebody the opportunity to learn, and by the way, it offers a free assessment, which is worth way more than the book. So we're hoping people will try out the assessment and see for themselves.
Okay, just final quick question here that I like to ask most of the guests is, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever given or received? Whether it's personal, related to your business, just what comes to mind?
The best piece of advice I was ever given is a gentleman that I recruited who did not get the job, but was a brilliant manufacturing executive who was a process genius. And when I started the recruiting process, he enjoyed the process. I had treated him with a lot of respect. And he said, "Can I help you with something?" I said, "Sure. What do you want to help me with?" He said, "I want to help you make your recruiting process a process." And I, at first, was like, I don't really understand that. But he put me into a conference room and said, "Okay, put step one right here." And I was talking and talking. He said, No. I want you to put a piece of paper down. I want you to tell me what you do." An hour later, we had a piece of paper. We had like 17 steps. And I built that into what I call the science of selection. That's why I realized I was much more about selection than recruiting. That was the differentiator in my work. For 25 years, I did all business on referrals. I never had to call on a client or look for clients. I am not a process person, but I needed a process. That piece of what happened allowed me to train the person who bought my business. In a solo performer, it's very difficult to sell your business. When she was interested, I said, "If you learn the process, I'll sell you this business under market, because that way I know you'll be successful and carry it on." And I could have probably made more money from somebody else, but I wanted her to have the business, and I knew she would follow the process because she was an engineer. So that's the best piece of advice that I was ever given. I took it. And I think it has made all the difference in the world. I'm a visionary. I see the big picture. But in doing recruiting, I needed to have a process, and that's what ensured my success. And that's why I found the assessments to be part of that process. I needed something that was truly objective and predictive.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. Where could people connect with you or learn more about smart work assessments?
Thank you so much, Jaden. It's been a pleasure. They can reach me at jane@smartworkassessments.com. They can go onto my website at smartworkassessments.com and put in their name there. Just reach out to me in person at jane@smartworkassessments. And if you do that, I'll email you back. If you want to learn anything, happy to spend time with you and share whatever tools I have, and also try to get you to take one of my assessments. So that's where you can find me.
Okay, great. Well, this is a Pipeline and People podcast. Until next time.
Thanks so much.